Welcome to another episode of Discourse. On this episode, we're going to be ranking and reviewing every Paramore album. My name is Nathan, and with me, I have my co hosts Kyle and Jeff. Also joining us this episode is a very talented vocalist and artist. We've got Lucas Woodland of Holding Absence. Lucas, thank you so much for being here. How are you doing?
I'm good. Thank you so much for having me, man. It's not really like press season for me at the moment, but I feel like I never do interviews about music. So I really, really am excited for this one. So thanks for having me.
Yeah. So if you could just tell us a little bit about yourself, who you are, your band, what you do, and anything to help us and the audience get to know you a little better before we dig into our whole discography discussion.
So my name is Lucas, and I sing for a band called Holding Absence. We've been kicking around for about nearly 8 years now, which is kind of crazy. But we're a UK-based band. We just last year released our third album, The Noble Art of Self-Destruction. And yeah, man, it's been, being in a band is fun. And I think we're kind of one of those bands that's fortunate where, we've had a very slow and steady kind of grow over the years. And, as time's gone by, we've been fortunate enough to have more opportunities and stuff. Yeah, so we're just kind of rocking. Like, we've just finished our fifth US tour. Obviously, you guys are from America. So we just did a headline run out there. Yeah, so that's me.
Yeah, I would say all the success is very well earned because y'all have just such a unique sound and it's so pleasant to hear. Like it's so good. That's all I can say about it. It's so good.
Thank you, man. I appreciate it.
Yeah. Absolutely. And for anyone who's somewhat unfamiliar with Holding Absence, I guess what songs do you feel would best encapsulate your sound? I guess another way to ask that is what songs that you've written are you most proud of?
Yeah, I mean, we've got one song that is like far more successful than the rest. We've got like one song which just is in a different stratosphere now. So I generally will kind of tell people to check out our song Afterlife. So that's normally like the kind of first point of entry. But, I think we're one of those bands, we're kind of lucky really because it's like we're good at the 3.5, 4 minute long emo pop kind of anthem songs, I guess,
Yeah.
But like I think we come into our own when we're writing the 6.5 minute long album closes as well. So we do have our cake and eat it sometimes, So I would say, if check out Afterlife, of course, because that's kind of the obvious one. But I'd say, honestly, the next song to check out would be a song called The Angel in the Marble, which is the song that closes our last record, The Noble Art of Self-Destruction. I'm not one of those people who's like about my old music and kind of constantly trying to grift my new stuff, you know what I mean? Like, but I really think that The Angel in the Marble is just probably one of our finer moments as a band. It is like quite emotionally profound. Yeah, I'd say check that one out.
Yeah, and I would also say go check out Honeymoon. That is an absolutely beautiful song.
Yeah, man. Okay, hell yeah. You, man. Yeah, I appreciate that. Because, that's one of those songs that's like, I guess it was a little bit out of our kind of jurisdiction in terms of sound at first. And then it's one of those songs that kind of grew into something like, kind of grew into its own space, which is really cool. So thanks. I appreciate that.
Yeah, it's great. All right. I don't want to hog the mic for this whole interview portion, so I'll let someone else jump in here.
Yeah, Lucas, I love the EP, The Lost and the Longing, that Holding Absence did with Alpha Wolf. And I'm just curious, how did that project come to fruition and how is it working with Alpha Wolf?
Yeah, our friendship with them began in 2019. We were both signed to Sharptone Records at that point, and we both just released our debut albums. Basically, we were opening Impericon Festival in Europe together, and we were made to share a tent with each other, like a little, and when I say tent, sorry, I don't mean like a venue tent, I mean like a backstage, like kind of gazebo, I guess. So, sometimes you're kind of put with bands in physical spaces and you kind of have no choice but to get on with them, So an Alpha Wolf was kind of like that for us. It was like we were sharing a space and we were kind of hanging out and we were chatting a little bit, obviously about the label and about whatever, and that's kind of where we first found a friendship with them, I'd say. And then I think their album actually came out just before the pandemic. But our album came out in like kind of in the first year of the pandemic as well. And I think The Greatest Mistake of My Life and A Quiet Place to Die, I think they were two albums that really flourished because of the pandemic, even though I view the pandemic as a real waste, like a sad loss of time for most bands. I think we both grew at the same time and, through the same means, really. And then one day, I mean, I don't know if you know this, but we did a split EP with Loathe back in 2018 as well. So this is something that we've been, has been on the plate for us for a long time. And of course, Loathe are just insane. So, I think we had like a motto, I guess, to release a song a year, every year, no matter what, and the time came where it was between records, like, what do we do? Do we just release a single on its own? Blah, blah, blah. And then we reached out to Alpha Wolf. And then the main thing I'd say is they were so good to work with. Like, if you look at the artwork, for example, the image is a photo of like some regal mirror in a church with a reflection of an angel statue, which is very much our kind of Catholic guilt kind of imagery. And then on top of that, you've got the spray paint, The Lost and the Longing, which is that kind of like, I guess, gritty attitude that Alpha Wolf put on everything. So even just the artwork itself was a great collaboration, but obviously we did songs with each other that I think we lent each other's strengths and had like some real success with as well. So that whole experience was great. And I really think Alpha Wolf are kind of the next big thing, I think, honestly. So yeah.
We agree. Alpha Wolf is awesome.
Yeah, I'm excited for the new album as well. I think they released these 3 new songs actually. It's cool as well because it obviously displays progression within their sound, but then at the same time, they're doubling down on what they've always been good at as well. So I think it feels like a perfect storm right now. Everything is kind of coming together at the right time for them. So I got my fingers crossed for them. I hope their new album absolutely flies.
Yeah, me too. The new songs really do sound kind of like a logical progression in their sound. Like you said, doubling down on what you're good at and then still finding ways to grow. Because I think it was that last single had a really kind of melodic sound to it, which was really interesting. And they've done that before, but not quite to this scale, and not certainly not as a lead single leading up to the album, as if I remember correctly.
Yeah, I'm really grateful for my involvement in the 60 Centimeters song, actually, because it's like, I think we I've never spoken about this, but Alpha Wolf were in town the night of my engagement party, and they actually played a show with Amity Affliction, and then managed to catch a taxi across town. They came over and had a couple of drinks and brought like about £300 worth of merch and just give it to all of my guests. And
that's awesome.
One day I'll put up a dedicated tweet about that or something, because like they really it was so fucking cool of them. But awesome. So they were there and they were chatting about that. And I think they said their bassist John, he'd been singing because of 60 Centimeters, it's like it was in the set. So he had to kind of step up to it. And, I hope in some way that inspired him to sing on the new song the way that he does as well. So grateful to be a part of their discography in any way,
Yeah, those collaborations are cool because it does kind of feel like it pushes bands out of their comfort zone a little bit and incentivizes them to try something new. And then they can take those new tools they have and like take them to the next album. It's cool. I love those kind of split EPs that y'all have done. I think they're really cool and really interesting pairings as well.
I said this when we did the Loathe split. And so, I've been saying this for 6 years now, but it's like more bands need to do that. Like, I don't understand why it's not like super common to do that. I mean, I'm trying to think of pair-ups in my head now, and I guess, at the end of the day, Holding Absence and Alpha Wolf and Loathe, like you would never have guessed those pair-ups, so it's kind of pointless trying to guess or make your own one in your head or whatever. But I just think if for example, a band like The Plotting You did a split with a band like Between You and Me or something like that, or like Stand Atlantic, you know what I mean? Like it would just be like cool, man. Everybody wins in those scenarios. So I've said it for 6 years now. I'm going to keep saying it, but like I think more bands should do that because it puts you out of your comfort zone, but it also just gives your fans more.
Absolutely. Yeah, I love that. I love an interesting pairing. Like our friends over in the Callous Dow Boys doing songs with like pulses. Like that's such an interesting pairing, but it works so well. And so it's like, I love seeing that kind of stuff, whether it be for just a song or a full EP. It's so cool. And I would love to see more of that in the scene.
Yeah, well, hey, maybe we'll do it again. At this rate, we're the only band doing
Oh,
it. I don't know, though. That's not a scoop. That's not a scoop. But,
don't worry.
you know,
We
it's like vultures.
No.
No, I'm joking.
Yeah, just one question, Lucas. Thanks for being here. Before we get started, what's your relationship like with Paramore, and why did you pick them as the band you wanted to talk about today?
Well, yeah, great question, man. So Paramore were kind of, I'd say, like phase two of like alt music for me. You know, like I got into bands like Gallows, and I mean, like bands like Rise Against, bands I'm not really into as much now, but you know, like My Chemical Romance and Fall Out Boy. That was kind of the first kind of push for me. And then I vividly remember just Kerrang TV was like the thing. And like when you were a kid in the UK, you'd have Kerrang TV on channel 368 and you'd have Scuzz TV on channel 374. And whenever there was an advert break on one, you would just switch to the other channel, you know, and you would just constantly be watching music videos. And I remember when Misery Business came out and was just being played like crazy on Kerrang and on Scuzz. And I remember thinking like, this isn't my kind of bag right now, but like I'm willing to give it a go. It was very loud and obviously very colorful, and you know, and on top of that as well, I mean, I don't know if I'd ever, and I know there's a whole discourse about the concept of a female fronted band and stuff, you know, so it's like that whole thing is kind of stupid and outdated. But back then it was like I had actually never really listened to a band with a girl singing, honestly. So it was all very new for me, you know. And I think Brand New Eyes came out soon after that, and it was just like, okay, like this is one of my favorite bands of all time now. And I've got to say, I just think in my lifetime they've been, I genuinely, actually, I think this is the truth. In my lifetime, they've been the most consistent band, because I love My Chem and I love I love Thrice, I love Radiohead, I love lots of different bands from different spaces, but there's no other band that has existed in real time that has kept me kind of, you know, satiated and engaged the way that Paramore have. And we won't speak about this because obviously this is Paramore's discography, but even Hayley Williams' solo stuff, I think is really spectacular, you know? So yeah, I have a good relationship with Paramore.
Yeah, that's awesome. All right. Well, before we get into the real discussion here, I have to plug the socials, have to do a little housekeeping. If you want to join the Discourse, you can find us on Twitter at Discog_pod, on TikTok at DiscogDiscourse, assuming TikTok's not banned here before too long, on Instagram at Discog.discourse. And if you could leave us a 5-star review on whatever platform you're listening on, that would help us a lot. If you're on YouTube, like, subscribe, all that. And Lucas, if you could just real quick plug any social media that you want to send out there so people can find y'all.
Cool, yeah. My band is Holding Absence. I think all of our handles are just Holding Absence. And then if you want to follow me, my name is Lucas Woodland. And on Instagram, my handle is Lucas Woodland with 2 O's. So, yeah.
Brilliant. As always, we do have a couple tweets we want to shout out from the last episode. If you want to get yourself a shout out, all you have to do is quote tweet our rankings whenever we put them out on Twitter. So this first one here is from Metalcore Zach at Mr. Zayachek. He says it's literally Horizons at number 1 and then every other album in order. There is no debate. I will fight over this. And we'll go through these kind of quick so we can get into the episode. But I think there is some truth to that in the sense that Parkway Drive since Horizons has kind of been on a downhill trajectory. The second tweet is from Old Man Metalcore at CDAWS91. He says, Horizons at number 1 with a little goat emoji next to it because it is literally the metalcore goat. 2 is Killing with a Smile. 3, Deep Blue. 4, Atlas. 5, Reverence. 6, Ire. 7, Don't Close Your Eyes. And 8, Darker Still. And then finally, Howie at Dante Demon Z says Mikey is based, and he is the only one with a list I can somewhat agree on. More proof that the Gloom in the Corner are cultured. And to that, I certainly say I very much agree. They are cultured. All right, gentlemen, that's all the housekeeping. Are we ready to dive into this?
Yeah, let's go.
I've never been more ready.
Excellent. So we're going to have Lucas leading the discussion. We'll be going through his list. So Lucas, without further ado, what is your least favorite Paramore album?
So my least favorite Paramore album, this might be controversial, but my least favorite Paramore album is actually the self-titled album.
That's actually my favorite Paramore album, so
Okay.
we're starting off on such a great foot here.
On a big difference.
No way. No way.
This is unfortunate.
Wait, did I do something wrong? No.
No, you did something very right, actually. You did something very right here.
Lucas, I really agree with you. So Lucas has it at 6, Nathan has it at 1, Jeff has it at 3, and I have it at 5. I being Kyle.
I just dropped a bit of a bomb, I think. So, yeah. But I think, personally for me, I think Paramore were in such an insane kind of swing from Riot into Brand New. I mean, the first 3 albums were very consistent, were constantly climbing up in quality, in my opinion. So I think it's 2 things. I think it's, thing A is obviously they'd lost members, so it was obviously harder to write music, you know? And I think that obviously kind of hit them. But then I think the other thing was just an identity issue. When you look at their album and their kind of the track listing of this album, it's like 15 songs. Honestly, sounds like 5 different bands. Like Now was the first song released. I don't know if you guys remember when that dropped. It was the most disappointed I'd ever been with a song being put out by a band, because it was just like, it was just a mess to me. It really was. And it was a shame, because it was like everything I love about Paramore is kind of missing from this specific song, you know. And then I have tried to give the album a go, like a lot, you know. I will say Daydreaming is probably my favorite song on the album.
Agreed.
I think it's a brilliant song. And then Last Hope, I think, is one of Hayley's best ever kind of hooks, you know, it's just a spark, but it's enough to keep me going. Mm-hmm. I think that is just such a sensational hook. And I think it kind of, just to conclude on my opinion of it, it kind of speaks to the fact that like the quality is there in this album, because 2 of their biggest songs are from this album. And I think that's where a lot of people might disagree with me, is like Still Into You and Ain't It Fun are like all-timers really for Paramore. You know, some people probably found them through those songs and are very nostalgic about this album. But for me, you know, I had such high standards with their first 3 albums. Sorry, I just listening to this album, that felt disjointed and honestly quite bloated. It was a shame. It was a shame to me, and I think all these years later, I still haven't been able to find much pleasure from this album. So
sure.
Yeah,
tag me in, Lucas. All right, just to piggyback on that, I agree that the quality is there. Like Lucas mentioned, it feels like they have a lack of identity, and it feels like they lost all the edge that they had previously on their first 3 records. It doesn't feel like they have a direction, or they really know who they are. And sure, that could come from lost members, but that edge that I'm sort of looking for that props up the identity, it feels like we're trying to have the illusion that it's still there, but it's so much more commercialized, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, just not something I've typically gravitate towards. And again, it doesn't feel like they've really picked a side. I feel like some of the best songs on this record are the real slow, swelling, beautiful songs, like Here to See Your Heartbreak.
Oh yeah,
that one of those Crazy Girls.
Yeah.
I literally just read Hate to See Your Heartbreak, and I was like, dude, I forgot how good that song is, actually. Yeah.
Those are fantastic songs.
Yeah, no, it's awesome. And the way they capture kind of that swelling, they have a huge atmosphere with the orchestra. She is fantastic on those songs. But if those are the 2 standouts and they don't really, they don't really fit into the album like you would think for the 2 best songs, or 2 of the best songs on a record, I wanted so much more after listening to the previous 3, and even listening to an album after this. I would like more direction. And yeah, I agree. It does seem a little bloated as well, with some pretty long sections of just instruments that, I don't know, I didn't really understand. But
we'll just go in ascending order, defending this album more and more as we go up.
Yeah. I'm about to put on a defense clinic, brother.
Okay. Here, I'll try to help you a little bit. Okay. My biggest gripe with this album is that it is bloated. Okay, this album clocks in at 17 songs. That's pretty ridiculous, in my opinion. And when I saw that for the first time, I was like, what the heck? But, I enjoy the 3 interludes
Yes.
on this album. I think that they're all unique. They all bring something different, and they're just fun to listen to. They don't overstay their welcome, especially the last one, I'm Not Angry Anymore. I think that's a great interlude. So I don't mind the interludes that much on this album. So that brings it down to 14 songs, which is a bit more in line with like some of their other albums, maybe a little bit longer. But if you look at it through that perspective, it's not that bloated. But I agree that, like, in my opinion, at least, this album kind of like Ankle Biters, Proof, One of Those Crazy Girls, like near the end, those songs just kind of happen for me. Unlike their other albums where I have like very specific gripes with them and problems, this one, the bad songs in this one are bad, quote unquote. They just kind of happen. They're average songs. And then everything else I like on this album.
Yeah.
Where on some of their other albums, I have songs that I really hate. And I can't really say that about this album.
Yeah.
I will say, I really hate Fast in My Car.
Same.
Really?
I really hate that song.
I don't like that. Yeah, I don't like that song.
Dude, an album opener as well. You start with the worst song on the album, pretty much.
No,
And then
no.
I don't know if it's the worst song on the album, but it's not the best for sure.
It's pretty bad.
No,
dude.
it's-
It's so annoying.
I think it's cool. We're just on completely different planets right now because I think that song is pretty cool.
Hey, you'll have your defense time.
You're right.
You'll have your defense time later.
You're right.
Yeah, I mean, I still think that this album is full of good music, like we've already kind of talked about. I agree with Kyle that the slow songs really stand out here. Compared to my number 4 album, I think this one wins out just due to the production, that this album sounds good, in my opinion, at least. And so what you have here is like a middle of the pack album to me, which is why I have it at number 3, but we're only talking about 6 albums, so it's functionally like in the middle. It has a lot of good stuff, some not so great stuff, but all in all, it sounds good. And maybe this will make more sense when we talk about some of their albums that I don't like as much. But yeah, I think this is like a good middle of the pack album. It has some good stuff, some not so good stuff. It's pretty middle.
Okay. All right.
Crack the knuckles.
Nathan.
Yeah.
Oh, Lucas.
That was incredible. Hold on. That was
my
beautiful.
gosh.
Let me paint a picture.
Oh boy.
Scene heresy about to happen. I've never really done a deep dive on Paramore's discography until preparing for this episode.
Ooh.
So I didn't really have that anticipation or anything leading into really any of these albums. So this is coming in from like a very blank slate perspective on Paramore, outside of course, like the big hits. And going into this just based on, kind of assuming what people liked about Paramore, I thought I knew what my number 1 album was going to be. And it wasn't this one. I, like y'all, looked at the track list and was like, 17 songs, that is very worrisome. That seems like a lot of time to be spending on one album, and it's probably going to be bloated. But then I listened to this, and I just could not pull myself away from this album. Every time I was like, oh, I should sit down and listen to some Paramore, I wanted to listen to this album. And to me, it just feels so fresh. And like, they definitely step away from the traditional Paramore sound here. But this, to me, I mean, there's so many interesting ideas on here, and I think they execute them all really well. And to speak to that, to what y'all were just talking about with Fast in My Car, this album kind of opens with more of a traditional alt rock track than the typical kind of pop punk that they had been doing. And I think there's some really fun effects that give the song depth and texture. I think it sounds great. Ain't It Fun? Obviously one of the huge hits on this album. Kind of feels like a precursor of what's to come on some of their future albums, with kind of the upbeat throwback feel to it. And it's also just so catchy. And the back half with the choir elements coming in and all the vocal runs and everything, it's just electric. Y'all also mentioned One of Those Crazy Girls, which kind of sounds like a modernized 50s, 60s doo-wop kind of thing. And it's so good. That's one of my personal favorites on here too. And then Kyle, you mentioned long instrumental sections that you don't really like. I assume that's in reference to the closing track on here.
Yes, definitely.
Yes.
It opens with a very, I guess, intimate instrumental, which really almost sounds like a recording of them recording, which is kind of an interesting idea that just transitions into this huge, noisy instrumental that really ends up closing the album. And I don't know, there was something about that. It put me in a trance when I was listening to it, just like this really big, and like the juxtaposition between that and the way the song opened. I don't know. I thought it was really cool. To Jeff's point, the interludes on here are really enjoyable. I'm usually not a huge fan of interlude tracks, but I really kind of like what they did here. And I think it does a good job of kind of breaking up the album into more digestible portions, I guess. Like, I think the pacing on here is really well done because for a longer album, you kind of need to have that pacing. And this does a good job of kind of facilitating different portions of the album that do kind of have somewhat of their own unique sound to them. Yeah, I don't know. I really like this album, and I'm kind of shocked to see that we're talking about it so early because I just could not stop listening to this.
I think it's kind of cool that, like, obviously, if this is kind of like your first kind of deep dive into Paramore, it's almost like you prefer this band rather than Paramore, if that makes sense. Like,
Yeah.
I don't want to diminish, but like, you know,
No,
if this
absolutely.
band was a different band, you know, it's like, and I think that's probably where our gripes come from, is like, it does feel like a different band, you know what I mean? And it was the first kind of like dip in my mind of like Paramore's coherency, I suppose. But obviously on then on your end, it's kind of dipped so far away almost that it's kind of different to what you expected even, you know. It's like, so I understand what you mean, especially, but yeah, man, being there, I'll never forget 2012 2013, man, like just my heart broke when that album came out. It's such a shame.
Yeah, I mean,
Nathan, it's no excuse as well because this is my first deep dive.
No, I wasn't trying to excuse my take. I was just saying,
he's giving context.
I don't need an excuse. This is my opinion, and I stand by it. This album's amazing.
I know. I know.
Oh my
it was
gosh.
a joke.
No, you're not allowed to joke here. This is a very serious discussion, Kyle. I like Ankle Biters. I know someone said they didn't like that song. I think that's a really fun song.
I don't know. I just feel like, you know, the second half of this album, there's some parts where it starts to kind of just songs happen and they're not really hooking me anymore.
Sure.
Ankle Biters was one of them for me.
I love just the super crunchy, like the big hits when they say ankle biters that kind of break up the song. It's so cool.
I love the drums in that song. That song does kind of go hard.
It's so energetic. Yeah.
This album, I don't know if you guys know this, but this album's drums were recorded by a drummer called Ilan Rubin. And he's the guy who, I can Google it now, but I'm right in thinking he played drums for Angels and Airwaves. He used to play drums for Nine Inch Nails. So like a lot of people actually, regardless of like the album itself, like a lot of people revere this like drum performance as like a real thing.
Yeah, he put on a clinic.
Yeah.
For sure. I don't know. I also, I mean, to try to bolster up my argument even more, I think this might be their best collection of hooks. Like, I think the choruses on here are absolutely phenomenal. Like, I know you said you don't like Now, but I think it has a really catchy chorus. Ain't It Fun is obviously huge. Part 2 is one of my personal favorite choruses on here. Last Hope, Still Into You, Ankle Biters, Proof, Hate to See Your Heart Break, One of Those Crazy Girls, Be Alone.
Yeah.
Just about every song on here has an absurdly catchy chorus. I guess a lot of Paramore songs have really catchy choruses. They're kind of really good at that. But I don't know, just everything about these hooks really stuck with me. I fell head over heels for this album. I'll say it. I love Paramore, and I will not back down from that.
The band or the album? Both, I guess.
Both. I'm going to say both. No, that was a good clarifying question. That was good. Just, I can't believe this. This happens every time we have a guest on. One of us goes and does something silly like this.
Yeah.
I love it. Yeah. Lucas, take us to your number 5.
Oh, boy.
So my fifth favorite Paramore album is purely Collateral Damage because it was their first and it was them at their youngest and at their worst production quality. So yeah, it was All We Know Is Falling.
So Lucas has it at 5. Nathan also has it at 5. Jeff has it at 4, and I have it at 3.
Just to elaborate on it, I think the songs are actually really, really good. First and foremost, I think 14 when writing some of these songs or recording some of these songs. I think Zach Farrow is 2 years younger than her as well. So I think in theory, he was like a 13-year-old kid recording some of this stuff. So when you take that into account, it is insane. I feel like if you did a greatest hits of Paramore now, I don't even know if any of these would actually make it. But Emergency is really good. Pressure. If you zoom out, you know what I mean? Like, I don't know what their top played songs are or whatever, but I feel like just being critical of their discography, I feel like a lot of people would maybe not even know of this on a greatest hits, you know what I mean? So, but then at the same time, I think there are some really good like little nuggets, like Here We Go Again is like a really cool, like kind of dancey kind of song, which is really, really cool. Never Let This Go is like far more emo and like introspective. And it is, like I said, Haley being so young right in this, it is kind of crazy how mature the lyrics are about love and I guess just being split up with or missing someone. Oh yeah, it's very rudimentary emotion, but it's like she was very, very mature for her age, and those lyrics are very good, and that song stands up very well. And then the other shout out I'd probably give is to the song My Heart as well, which is the album closer. Crazy that they released an album like this so young, and also as well I will say like so early into the genre, because at this point as Panic at the Disco had only just started doing their thing, and Fall Out Boy had only just started doing this thing, and there was almost like no meta at that point, it was almost like emo pop punk, like nobody really had a roadmap. So when you listen to this, songs like Whoa and Here We Go Again are way more punk, and then My Heart, there's like a screamo outro at the end.
Yeah.
But ultimately I think the first three songs on this album kind of quintessential. And I think it's very good quality, but like I said, I think sadly it falls foul to just being them at their youngest, their least experienced, and having the least amount of money kind of behind them at that point, So, yeah.
Might I just throw in there, Lucas, we're so back. We went from being on completely opposite pages to being 100% aligned
we're friends
on this
again
album. Yeah, we're back. Don't even worry about it. I agree with a lot. I really like the way you phrased it at the start. Like, this is kind of just collateral damage from the fact that they're strong songwriters, and you can clearly see it already on this album, but they're only going to keep growing into that more and more as they go. And I think for a debut album, and as you said, at such a young age, this is really polished to the point where it's kind of unbelievable. Like, it's obviously a little rough around the edges. There are a few improvements that could be made, probably most notably in the production. But like those critiques are really nitpicks, because I think this is a really strong debut album.
Yeah.
And you mentioned a lot of songs I really like on here. Whoa is fantastic. Here We Go Again. I love Here We Go Again so much.
Yeah, same. Yeah.
That groovy riff that's just complemented perfectly by the drumming. And then kind of the song evolves and they keep coming back to that riff, but kind of switching up the drum beat under it to change the feel of the rhythm entirely. I love stuff like that, just playing with rhythm, and they do it so well. Pressure is also really fantastic with a great chorus. Emergency has some fun moments. I don't know. I think really this just speaks to how good of songwriters they were from the start. They're good at writing big hooks. They're good at writing fun riffs. They're good at developing songs. Like, none of these songs really feel incomplete. Like, they all feel like they've seen their vision through fully on here, and they're dynamic, and they take you on journeys with like the dynamics of the songs. And it's just so impressive. Yeah, I was really kind of blown away by this album, with the perspective that they were so young, and really it only falls so low because everything else in their discography is so good.
Yeah, I can just echo what both of you have said. When I first listened to this album, I was thinking to myself, like, how high am I going to put this thing? Because I liked it that much. But, as I continued to listen through the discography, it kind of fell. And I think the biggest contributor to that was kind of the production. Because like you mentioned, it really held it back for me, which is why I have it below Paramore. I love the first half of this album so much. Everything up to Never Let This Go, I think, is excellent. Especially Emergency, which isn't a song I think we have mentioned yet, but a very emotionally impactful song talking about an important topic that I think they do very well. And I think kudos to them for being so young and being able to pull something like that off. Where I think this album falls, I don't like Whoa that much. I know you guys like it. I'm not the biggest fan of it.
Whoa.
I agree. I think it is quite cheesy, I think. It does
exactly.
fall on the cheesy, yeah.
Yeah, no, that's literally the note I had, was the chorus on this song absolutely rocks. It's a little cheesy, it's a little corny, but it works.
Yeah, I think it's fine. It's just a weaker song in my opinion. And then Conspiracy and Franklin, to me at least, those songs just kind of happen. But My Heart is a great closer.
Yeah.
All in all, I can only echo what you guys, the praises that you've given to this album. And I think that the critiques, for me at least, are similar in the fact that the production and also just some of the songs at the end hold it back from being higher. But it could have very easily been my number 3.
Yeah, I like Woe, so I really do think All We Know, Until Woe, all songs that I would download and listen to. And my favorite song on this record, I think it's a top 10 song, is Brighter. I think Brighter is awesome.
Yeah, true.
Gigantic. And the fact that all 4 of us have listed a standout song and it's been a different song every time, I think shows that the quality of these songs and the songwriting overshadows the mix. It overshadows the production. And that these songs are noticeably ahead of their time for, like Lucas was mentioning, these they're kids, they're teenagers. And they're writing songs that we're talking about 15 years later, and we're picking out 4 songs praising them as the best on the record. I think it speaks volumes to, again, their songwriting ability. But and I really have no praises to add that you guys haven't already said. But not having many gripes and genuinely enjoying a debut record from this time period in this genre of music, I feel like that's pretty rare. I love this record, and like Jeff, I heard this album for the first time and I was like, wait a minute, how high am I going to put this?
I think Brighter might be one of the best choruses on there, to your point. It's a perfect example of how they kind of pick up the energy in the chorus, and they do it so often and so well.
And like her voice is so beautiful on those down verses as well, just thinking about Brighter.
Mm-hmm.
And then she can flip the switch and jump up. You know, like her range will just jump up.
And yeah, that chorus is miles high. Yeah.
And now it's a stick of dynamite. I love what they did here and really what they created.
I think another cool thing that we haven't spoken about is the track listing is just 10 songs as well. So it's like, I think we can all agree that like towards the tail end, it does dip a little bit. But it's like I said to you guys earlier, you know, being a songwriter, these are things that I think about. Like how many songs can you pull off without losing somebody's attention, right? And I think like with this album, they're not trying to like go out too much. It's quite a clinical album. It's in and it's out. And how long is this? Like 30 odd minutes, probably, I think.
Something like that.
Yeah, 35 minutes. Yeah. So it's like on top of all the things we've said about this album, like it is quite clinical as well.
Yeah. Like maybe it does slow down at the end, but it doesn't necessarily overstay its welcome. Like I'm not really looking to turn it off through those last tracks, where we've had some debut EPs that we've talked about that I'm like, man, this needed to be over 3 songs ago.
Yeah, that are hard to get through.
They've just been good the whole time. That's all there is to it.
Yeah.
It's natural talent.
Cool. Right. We're going to gonna move on to number 4.
Yeah.
So for me, 4th place, and I'm gonna be real with you. I literally just changed this on my little list because it's like I think 3 and 4 are like super contentious between like cultural relevance and nostalgia, but at the same time like quality of music and like I guess like we said about being a bit more clinical. So yeah, my 4th favorite is Riot.
Now that is interesting.
That's crazy. That's crazy.
Whoa.
Jeff,
crazy.
Nathan, and I all at number 2.
I'll make my piece, and then you guys can just eat me alive.
It's gonna be a riot.
Nice. Yeah, let's go. Come on. I like it.
Here all morning, boys.
So I think Paramore's first 3 albums are them just absolutely snowballing into this monster of like talent, like songwriting expertise, and then on top of that as well, like I said, one thing that can't be understated is like how relevant this was to the culture. Like if you guys, I don't know how old you guys are, right? So maybe I'm showing my age, but it's like nobody my age wasn't thinking about The Color Orange for that year of their lives. You know what I mean? Like that video and the artwork and Haley's mic with the tape around it, like that like year of music was just dominated by this album, you know. Ms. Biz was definitely my first song that I heard of theirs as well. And then I remember, you know, then having known them, just paying attention, and Crush, Crush, Crush would come up on the television all the time. That's What You Get would come up on the TV all the time. And, you know, honestly, man, as far as like singles go, I think that is like three kind of like, do you know what? I think maybe, I don't know if I disagree with the decision I just made, actually, looking at this. I may be hokey-pokey a bit too soon, because looking at this, what an album this actually is. But yeah, oh man, whatever, we'll live with it. Man, actually, can I change my answer?
We'll allow it.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
I can sense the remorse. It's a heavy burden you're carrying.
Yeah,
We've all felt it, Lucas. That's the thing. We've all felt the remorse immediately.
yeah. Okay, right. So maybe this might be my third favorite, thinking about it. But anyway, let's keep talking about it. So, you know, but I basically remember buying this CD, and like, for a pessimist, the optimistic kind of opened things up, and it's just like the energy on that is insane.
Huge.
And then that's what you get. Hallelujah is insane. I think the moment where this album really shines for me is When It Rains and Let the Flames Begin, because those two songs are like career highs for me. I think those songs are just so like mature and cool and emotional. And then, yeah, I feel like the only kind of gripes I'd maybe have is like Miracle and Being Real is kind of forgetful. Born for This, I think maybe isn't the best ending, because it's a bit too like trite. You know, it's like closing an album and having a song that's like, yeah, we're glad that we did the band. Everybody loves our band. You know, it's like, it is a bit cheesy, I think. But once again, as well, I got to say, like, Fences is a really, really great song.
Yes.
Shows their range, because it's like nothing I've ever heard before. You know, it's like a weird kind of, I can't even describe that song.
Yeah, I think that's a sleeper choice for maybe the most fun song on this album. I love that track.
Yeah, closing statement. All done. So you guys can crack on with your number two together now.
I want to say one thing. You mentioned When It Rains and Let the Flames Begin and how that's a career high. I would expand that to From Hallelujah to Let the Flames Begin.
Yeah.
And the variation of those four songs, yet they're four of, in my opinion, the top songs on the album. I think that her best vocal performance is on Hallelujah. That 4-track run is unbelievable every time, that it's in the same album, that they're so different, but that they flow so well. And then Born for This, I do agree it's a little cheesy, but I do kind of respect the callback to last album, the Whoa callback.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I feel like, I mean, I kind of respect it, but no, I agree that's cheesy. But
It is a bit cheesy. But you're right, though. And I think as well, I will say, like, you know, when that first album came out, they were, like we said, they were children. And now this album's come out, and they're kind of the biggest band in the world. So it's like,
yeah,
you know, that song is very much like we were right all along, you know, and calling back to the first album. Like, yeah, to be fair, that is like, there is some sort of profound kind of energy to that, even if it is a little bit ham-fisted, perhaps.
Yeah, a little cheesy, but no, I agree with most things on this record, and that every song is such an energy ball. And when it's not an energy ball, when they kind of break the mold and go through, you know, When It Rains, it's awesome. It's beautiful. Her voice on this record is, I think, par none.
I mean, and this is one of those classic cases where they take their sound from the debut and kind of perfect it on the following album and expand on it. And I think one thing that really stuck out to me about this album is just how good of a job they do to give each of these songs unique identities. Like, every song on here has its own moment or unique element that really separates it from the rest. Like, For an Optimist, great opener, sets the stage for the album, kind of picks up where the last album left off. Misery Business with the sample at the start and then the snarky bite to it, which is just fantastic. And I mean, like, that song's obviously kind of the big hit on here, and I think it has every right to be, because that chorus is just absolutely infectious, and that whole song soars. I mentioned Fences as a sleeper choice for being the most fun song on here. I just think, like you mentioned, it just has such a unique sound to it, with the really busy bass lines in the verses and the emphasis on the kind of acoustic guitar throughout a more energetic song. And they do use the acoustic guitar on here throughout the entire thing to kind of give depth and texture. They just do it so well on here. And then, of course, the vocal melodies in that song are so energetic and so interesting. Yeah, I think Fences might be my favorite song on here. It's so good. Crush, Crush, Crush might be a close second, though. I think that song is also really great.
Yeah, I was gonna. Yeah, that song's amazing.
I could just sit here and list off every song and like one thing I love about it. But to sum it all up, this album just obviously expands their sound and it's fantastic. This is a phenomenal album.
Yeah, in my opinion, if anyone were to put this album at number one, I don't think I'd have a problem with it, just because I think this album is so strong.
Yeah.
It has so many good moments, so many good songs. I think, in my opinion, for a pessimist, a pretty optimistic, all the way down to like Let the Flames Begin, I think is like a great run of just amazing songs. Like Kyle said, I mean, each of these songs are so fun and so full of energy. And although I agree, Nathan, that it is a continuation of their old sound, I definitely think that they're adding, some of that more pop fun elements to it, which is just such a great combination for these songs. And I think throughout their discography, their albums get a little bit more poppy each time. Not a bad thing. It's just a kind of what I've heard, at least as my opinion. But I think here you get such a nice balance of the sound.
Yeah.
One notable exception, though, and Nathan, I'm glad you brought this up. Crush, Crush, Crush. That song to me is not very fun. I think it's a very serious song. It has a very serious sound to it.
It's like a cool song.
It's cool, yeah. It sounds a little different than anything on the album, but I love it so much. It's like a little eerier. It has like sort of that more serious tone to it. But I think it works so well. That one just brings like, I don't know, a different feel. So that song's my favorite on the album.
Nathan, you mentioned Fences. This might be a wild poll, but remember the band New Haven? They have a song Dead.
Yes.
The bass line on that song sounds identical to Fences.
Yeah, that is kind of an insane pull, but now that you mention it, I do kind of hear that. I mentioned earlier that I thought I knew what my number one album was going to be going into this. It was this album. I thought this was going to be my number one for sure.
Then you made the wrong decision.
No, then I became enlightened.
So not to spoil the rest of my list or anything, but I'm not a fan of pop at all. I don't really like pop that much. And and I think that this album is so good because it doesn't overdo, like, I guess, the pop sound, which in my opinion they kind of overdo it later. Not to spoil anything, but I think this album and my number one just hit that kind of balance so perfectly, and they create this beautiful, like, you get like the nice riffs and the fast songs, but also like the catchy hooks, the great production. This album and my number one, which I can't believe I can't say it, but I think are so it makes the point that I'm trying to make is hard because I can't spoil my number one album.
Jeff, we know what your number one is.
Yeah,
we know what your number one is.
Thanks for the disclaimers. I hate pop. You guys will never guess.
But yeah, so I just think these two albums that we're going to talk about are standouts above the rest by far, and Riot is kind of the first case to that.
Cool. Okay, do you want to move on? Number three?
Yeah. Well, did we move Riot to your number three, and we're now jumping back to your
sorry. Yeah, no, you're right.
No, I just wanted to make sure. I just want to make sure we're on the same page.
When I saw you change on the list, I was like, thanks.
I got you.
Yeah, right. So my number 4 below Riot is this. And this is where I struggled with this, because I actually think, sounds stupid, but I actually think this is kind of Paramore at their best, because they are really creating, like, I don't want to sound like pretentious, but they are making like intellectual music now. Like their music is like, it's very creative. Like musically, it's different in the theory. There's a lot of unique kind of chord progressions and stuff they've been using on some of these songs. Texturally, the production is definitely in its own space. And on top of that as well, I think one thing that can't be understated is, like, this feels like a band wrote an album in a room rather than a band wrote an album in a studio. And I think that is quite rare these days. So this album really, to me personally, the two things that hold this back, I would say the ratio of hits versus misses, I think is as successful as some of their other albums. And then the other thing I'll say, and I haven't said this about any of their other records because it hasn't really felt this way, but I think pacing is a real big thing on an album. And like, for me personally, like the last 3 songs are just low energy. So, you know, you're 7 songs in and like, you know, this album, I will say, like, I personally, I'm not the biggest fan of Big Man, Little Dignity. It doesn't hit me the way I know it hits other people, but that means the 6 of the 7 songs at the beginning of this album are genuinely like very unique and very cool, and they tick all the boxes, you know. But sadly, the last 3 songs, even though I enjoy them, I just think they've hemorrhaged like this low energy kind of thing. So that's where I'd put it there. And looking at yours as well, I feel like we've all got kind of a similar headspace on this kind of being lower in their discography. But I really have to give them plaudits for like doing something hard and doing it successfully to an extent, you know?
Yeah. Kyle, I want to hear your opinion because you have this in last. And, Jeff, you're obviously down there with them. I'm kind of surprised to see I have this the highest out of any of us at third.
I am shocked, Nathan, that you have this at third. Like this album I listened to, I was like, all right, Nathan and I will at least be on the same page. Obviously not. I was like, this is the type of music I'm pretty sure Nathan hates. I've known this guy for like 18 years. I mean, listen, nothing jumps out the page. I know, Lucas, you mentioned it. I think that there are 2 songs on this record that I would return to. I think This Is Why is really fun.
Banger.
The jazz theme in this album is so new and so fresh and so cool. And I want to rank this higher because of it, because they took a leap.
Well, Kyle, you can.
No, I cannot. No, not a chance. Because there are some horrendous songs on this record, in my opinion, that keep it down. The French word song,
C'est comme ça.
C'est comme ça. Yeah. Yeah.
You mean that absolute banger? You mean that
song
absolute
is
banger?
so bad. And it's also like
it's horrible.
No, it's
and
so
I think
good.
there's a little cringy theme to the lyrics of this record. It's like it is what it is. That's what the French words mean for the uncultured.
Oh, man of the world, I see.
Yeah, you know, I did French on Duolingo for like a month.
Oh,
wow.
I mean, like the news, I think it's a really weird commentary, especially the first lyric comparing war overseas to a headache. Like, all right, well, this is weird. The chorus is catchy, and which kind of props it up. But again, it's this theme, the running out of time song, always running out of time. It just seems like classic millennial self-deprecation that is trying to be humorous and ironic, but just isn't, in my opinion. Big Man, Little Dignity. I don't like that song, Lucas. I agree with you. And yeah, the last 3 songs on the album are bad. Like I will just say Liar, Crave, and Thick Skull, just snoozers for me. Overall, it falls flat. But I would be remiss not to mention a potential top 10 song, if not top 20, You First. I think You First is fantastic.
I think for me, You First and Figure Eight, one after each other, are really, really, really good. So I'm glad you agree on that. Yeah,
I agree.
Yeah, and I don't love Figure Eight, but I do agree that those back-to-back props up the album a little bit.
Yeah, I do kind of love the lyric in You First where she says, I'm living in a horror film where I'm the killer and the final girl.
Yeah, it's such a good lyric.
That's such a sick line.
I agree. I think that this album is what makes this discography so hard to kind of pick and choose favorites, because there's an element in every single album that I really, really like. In this record, I really, really like their jazz drums throughout, the much more stripped down nature of it. It almost feels like it's very ethereal. If you guys are familiar with the artist Q, it's pretty similar to that, and just stripped drums, completely different direction. And some of these songs are awesome, but some of these songs are why it's in the basement for me. Mostly due to that French song. That French song is one of my least favorite songs I've heard in a while.
Yeah,
that French song.
That French song. You told us what it means.
Yeah, it is what it is.
Just say it is what it is. Or say c'est comme ça. She says it in the song like a million times.
I know, but I've done so much to forget. I can't go back.
Intentionally not naming the song, like the song that can't be named. I agree with you. So remember when I said there are a few, songs on albums that I hate? This is the first example of that. I think The News, Running Out of Time, and Say Comme Ça are 3 songs that I really don't like. Like, at all.
Really?
Yeah, I really don't like those 3 songs. The News annoys me because the way she says like war, like in the verses, that it just like grates my ears. And then Say Comme Ça, obviously, I don't know what that song was doing. Like, to be honest,
I love this.
I don't know. It just does not work for me. And then Running Out of Time is it just annoys me. I don't know. Those 3 songs really brought the album down for me at first. But the reason why I don't have this at the bottom is because I like Big Man, Little Dignity. I like You First. I like Figure 8 a lot. Figure 8, I think, is fantastic.
Yeah.
Like, I love that song. And then Liar, Crave, and Thick Skull, I don't think are standouts, but I think they're serviceable. I don't hate them. I actually kind of like sometimes I'll put this album on, start with Big Man, Little Dignity, and just listen to the end and just have it on as background music because I think it works really well in that context. I know, Lucas, you were saying low energy, but if you put it on as like background music with like a little bit of a psychedelic feel that they have and the funk they have going on throughout the album, it makes for good study music, I have to say. And so in that context, like ignoring The News, Running Out of Time, and Say Comme Ça, I think this is like not a bad album. And I don't personally think it's a bad album. I just think it's a good album with some bad songs on it.
It's interesting. The 3 you dislike were all released as singles.
That's a good catch.
Yeah, I didn't know. I wasn't aware of that, but that.
So Jeff, you dislike those 3 songs more than the last 3 songs on the record? I mean, I guess your rationale makes sense of like the more ethereal background, but those last 3 songs I just feel like are.
Depends what you want from it as well, because like at the end of the album, like for me, I don't want snoozers, and then I guess for you at the beginning of the album, these songs are kind of annoying, right? So it's like, would you rather the casual snoozers or the annoying high energy songs,
Yeah, and I want the snoozers, and that was my take on the album. Like starting with Big Man, Little Dignity, I was like, oh, okay. I kind of like if you just take this as like a funk kind of like background, more like casual listening rather than listening. Yeah, kind of like that. It's not bad, and I actually quite like the second half of this album quite a bit. That's why I don't have it at the bottom.
All right, guys. Earlier, I was a self-titled defender. I'm about to become a This Is Why defender.
So tell us this is why.
Yeah, go ahead.
Nice, very good. This album, it has the sauce. I mean, like, I don't know what to tell you. Like, this album is cool. It's weird. It's super out there sometimes, but I kind of love it for that. Like, there's some really weird composition throughout this album. Like you were talking about the psychedelic and the jazz and all of that. And there's even some interesting instrument choices. And the vocal melodies are really weird. For me, it leads to there being so much to chew on. Like, this album is always interesting to me. And I think kind of the perfect example of that is Kyle's favorite track, Say Comme Ça. Like, it's so weird, but it is one of the most infectious earworms I've heard in this discography. And every time I hear it, I'm guaranteed to be walking around my house for the rest of the day like, Say Comme Ça, Say Comme Ça, just kind of humming it to myself, which, I mean, if you think the song's annoying, then it is what it is. But I mean, it's so catchy. I think it's great. It's weird, but it's great. I had to sit down with my sister. We had a little chat because she's a huge Paramore fan. And there's another album in this discography that's about to make my list look very questionable. Like, why does this album work for me when that one doesn't? And on paper, maybe this one shouldn't, because a lot of my gripes with that other album are that the energy's kind of down and like there's not a lot of alt rock riffs on there like they've had in the past. But even despite that, this album still really works for me. And I think something she said captures it really well. She said something along the lines of like, This Is Why feels like that album, but with the attitude and bite of early Paramore. Like, it's kind of a return to roots without forsaking their growth. And I think that's fairly accurate of what's going on here. Like, instead of having that kind of really poppy 80s synth pop sound, this one sounds very like maybe 80s new wave alternative music. Like, there are moments on here that remind me so much of artists like the B-52s, a band that I will die on the hill that they had great music. I love the B-52s. And so to hear kind of a modern spin on that, I love it. I love hearing that. It works so well for me. And this album, I mean, it certainly isn't as bright and cheerful as that other one. This is really kind of dreary and kind of off-putting, but it has that energy that I just love. Like we mentioned it already. This is why opening this album, I think it's great.
Yeah, it is a really good song.
It has that weird kind of mellow section at the start before just exploding into a massive chorus that's so catchy. And I think that might be a top 10 song of theirs, if I'm being completely honest. And then it goes into the news, and that's another super energetic chorus and song that I really like. Like, it's very quick. And I feel like you don't really find songs like that on the other album that I'm not mentioning because we haven't mentioned it yet. The News is one of those songs that sounds very B-52s to me.
I think, I'm sorry, just to piggyback on the B-52s thing, you know, like for me, this is like Talking Heads core. Like, it's
For
just,
sure.
You can tell they really, really like aimed for that world.
Absolutely.
And I think maybe that's where this becomes like less or more palatable, because the first 4 songs is them attempting to do like a very hard to do sound from the 70s, basically, you know?
Yeah.
And then I think You First and Figure Eight become more Paramore-ish. Like, I actually think the choruses to those 2 songs do sound like any off Riot, perhaps, you know, if you were to isolate them, you know?
I don't know. I mean, to speak to what you're saying about like the pacing of the album earlier, I think that's kind of spot on. I do think this album ends on kind of a down note. And it's so funny just how we're on completely different planets yet again. I think the first half of this album is awesome. Like, it's just so much fun to listen to. It's so weird. It's so different, but I love it. I think this album's awesome. And I will say, when it came out, I listened to it, was kind of feeling some of the tracks, but not really in love with it the way I am now. I think this is a phenomenal effort.
One thing that I think might be worth chatting about as well is probably my least favorite thing about this album is the first 4 songs were released as singles. So like we were saying earlier about starting, I think Jeff mentioned about starting with Big Man Little Dignity. I feel like I actually had no choice but to start with that song sometimes, because I was like, I know all these songs already, you know? And maybe that's a conversation to have about releasing singles. And like, you know, I know a lot of people think releasing the last song on an album as a single is like sacrilege. But I think for me, releasing the first 4 is also sacrilege, because it's like, I don't feel like...
It is interesting.
Yeah.
You got to kind of skip it to get to the freshness. So you have to skip.
Yeah, exactly. The album kind of starts at track number 5, really, because I've cured all the other songs, you know?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
I think album rollouts are kind of an interesting thing these days. You can't release the first 4, which I think there's a lot of truth to that. It feels weird. You can't release the closing track. I think there's a lot of truth to that. It generally feels kind of weird.
Releasing too many songs.
Yeah, you put out too many, people complain because they've heard the full album. It's like, there's never going to be an option that
everybody's happy with.
It's everyone. Yeah. 4 in a row being singles is certainly interesting.
Lucas, do you think if the singles were spread out more evenly in the album, this album would be higher? Like, do you think it had that drastic of an effect on your enjoyment while listening?
Yeah, very valid question, because, if you look at it, the first 4 songs I kind of skip because I've listened to enough.
Mm-hmm.
The last 3 songs I find are too hemorrhaged and like bulk, like low energy. I can't help but feel like, if we did scatter some of the first 4 songs, maybe keep This Is Why as an opener, because that does make sense, but tracks 2, 3, and 4, if they were scattered amongst the rest and maybe split up tracks 8, 9, and 10 a little bit, honestly, I think this probably could be higher. But I will say, though, Riot, man, I didn't realize how much better that album was until talking about it. So, yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think, to bring back the single discussion real quick, this is kind of my last thought on it. The singles, if you look at the track list, the first 4 tracks are singles. Those have kind of a noticeably different feel than the rest of the album.
Yeah.
So it is really interesting to release all the songs that kind of sound like that ahead of time. And then the rest of the album having kind of a different sound. It almost feels like it set itself up for failure a little bit, because there's not another song that's really as energetic as those 4 throughout the rest of the album. And so, looking at the way I've ranked these, I do very much prefer that first half. So I wonder if, maybe don't release the News, release something like Figure Eight to give more of a complete idea of what the album is going to have to offer. Yeah, it's interesting.
Cool. Okay, are we ready to move on to number 2?
Yeah, let's get to your number 2.
Cool. So my number 2 is, I'm predicting everyone's going to disagree with me here, but my number 2 is After Laughter.
Did you hear what I just said about another album I didn't really like that much? Yeah.
Oh, yo.
Yeah.
We've got two bottom places here. Okay.
Wait. Jeff, how is this not number one? Just after the disclaimers you gave earlier.
Oh, okay. All right. Let me explain it in
You love pop
in
music.
explicit detail why I don't like this album. It's very simple. I don't like pop albums, and this to me sounds like a very basic pop album, and I don't like that.
Jeff, I just need to give you a heads up right now. This pick that we've just made is going to ruffle some Paramore fan feathers.
That's fine, and I understand why people like this album. It has a lot of hits. It did exactly what they were intending to do with this album, which was to make mainstream appeal, to make radio hits, and to kind of make their sound go mainstream, which it did, and it worked. And this album, like, there are songs in here that blew up, right? So this album hit exactly what they were trying to do. It's just not my cup of tea personally.
Sure.
And it's nothing against the album. It's nothing against Paramore trying to make their sound more generalizable to the public, make more radio hits. Go for it. That's fine. It's just I'm not a huge fan of pop. And to me, this album sounds like a very basic pop album compared to their sound that they were making, 2009 and prior, maybe arguably 2013 and prior. This is just such a deviation from their normal sound that it just doesn't work for me personally.
Sure.
So I think for me, I think I've got kind of the perspective of like the experience, right? Because like we agreed on earlier, Paramore for me was my least favorite, and it kind of felt like they lost their way a little bit. And I'm trying to figure out how was it 2013 and then 2017? Yeah, so I'd had about 4 years where I was like not excited about Paramore, basically, having them been one of my favorite bands, And then when After Laughter started rolling out, or even just Hard Times, when Hard Times came out, it was like what they were trying to do with the self-titled, I guess, more concentrated, more streamlined. Like, it was like I got what they were trying to do with the self-titled, but I saw what they were succeeding at doing with After Laughter. And I think Hard Times is I guess, the biggest single off of this album. And it's interesting that just looking at it now, their last two records have both opened with their lead singles, which I find really interesting. But for me, the first 5 songs are like good, consistent pedigree, like pop, I guess. But then, like, I think 26 is a really, really great song. I know it's not exactly prog or anything, but it's like, it feels like a left turn to have such a kind of beautiful, like, simple kind of acoustic track there. And one thing that I think, like I know you said about it kind of feeling like a by numbers pop album, I really rate Idol Worship into No Friend. Like, the concept of having a song that kind of feels like it's off This Is Why a little bit. Like, this felt like the Talking Heads song on After Laughter, but then having it finish and then play the instrumental for another 3.5 minutes, and then having like a spoken word guest feature playing like in the background almost. That song goes from being like a cool, different song to being like a 6-minute long kind of groovy song, you know what I mean? And for that to be at the end of an album that has been consistent, I mean, Pool is great, Grudges is great, Caught in the Middle is great. I actually think my least favorite song on this album is the last one. And I think that's just, once again, is kind of collateral.
Really?
Yeah, I would say so. I think it's just a beautiful song, but it's like all the others, like, I choose to listen to, whereas that one, I've never sat down and been like, I want to listen to Tell Me How, And the album could have ended with No Friend, personally, and I think I would have been cool with that, So, but yeah, just to kind of cap it off, I worried about Paramore, and they came back with a really consistent, streamlined vision. And I guess whether or not you like the vision is its own conversation. But for me, it's like we're playing to Haley's strengths again, but I actually like the consistency of this time. And I think this is where Taylor stepped up as a songwriter and as a guitarist as well. And you can really feel like his identity kind of came out for the first time on this album. So for me, yeah, I think it was kind of, I guess, the kind of romance of falling back in love with this band, and it still feeling like Paramore, but definitely feeling like they'd come out of the chrysalis a little bit,
Mm-hmm. I 100% agree with like playing to Haley's strengths. And the reason I have this rated over the self-titled is it feels like this record has an identity, and it didn't really feel like self-titled had much of a direction. This one, they know what they're doing. And I mean, the first 3 songs on this record are so addicting, especially in my opinion, Rose Colored Boy. The chorus is so good. And her voice just sounds great on this album. It really captures, again, direction in their career that they're going and her strengths. And it almost feels like she can be strong in just about any type of music she does. And I think this album shows that.
I had a really interesting time listening to this album because it is certainly more poppy. And I think honestly, it's just like one step too far removed from what I'm generally looking for in an album and the type of music that I enjoy. And I don't think it's like they sold out. They just wanted to get more popular and write big pop songs. To me, this feels like it's very evident that this is the direction that they wanted to go in. And this was 100% their choice. I mean, they were already a huge band. It's not like going more mainstream would do them that big of a jump, I guess. I think it's pretty clear they have an appreciation of the style of music, and they definitely bring their own sound to it. But for me, I think it's just one step too far out of what I typically enjoy. Like the energy for me isn't quite there. And there is a lot of dissonance in my list, I feel like, when I sit down and look at it. Like, how can After Laughter be in last place, but This Is Why is number 3? For me, This Is Why has that weird factor that I really enjoy. And it also brings back some more of the bite, like my sister had said. And then also, like, how can After Laughter be in last place, but Paramore, the self-titled, is at number 1? And it's like, for me, well, that just has that big alt rock attitude, and there's big riffs on there and big moments, and of course it has the energy. And Paramore kind of feels like a transition album into this at some points. Like I mentioned, there are some songs where you can kind of see the elements of this album trickling into their songwriting style. But yeah, for me, like those 3 albums write a very fine line between, oh, I really like this, and oh, this isn't quite for me. And like this falls just on the, oh, this isn't quite for me. And that's not to say there's like not a single thing on here I like. I mean, some of the tracks we mentioned already, I really do enjoy. Hard Times, super fun. And I really love the chorus. And the vocoder bridge is sick.
Oh, yeah.
Rose Colored Boy is another really fun track. And so like
Anger.
There are things on here I really like a lot of the unique instrument choices throughout the album. It has a good flavor to it. Obviously, Haley sounds great. Like, I think everyone's performing super well. This just isn't quite for me. And I think it's more on the receiving end than the what they're giving end. So,
yeah, completely agree, Nathan. It has nothing to do against this album itself. It's just the kind of music and the sound this album's producing is just not something I would find myself going back to. And if we're ranking albums in terms of how much we'd like to go back to it, that's why this one's at the bottom for me.
Well, that leaves us with one last album. Lucas, you're number 1.
You have a curious spot open
together
at number 4.
Yeah, let's get into it.
Well, so I'm glad most of us agree. My favorite album of Paramore's is Brand New Eyes.
It wouldn't be any other way.
75% is quite the score, isn't it? Wow.
That's a pass in my book.
Oh no! Yeah,
Nathan, this episode has been an abject disaster for you.
Right yeah, this is an absolute Nate disaster class. But I stand by it. I have the correct list. You know, sometimes you just got to stick up for yourself.
This is why Above Brand New Eyes is not the correct list. Like, there's just something one thing went wrong.
Anyway, I think just the best way of kind of describing this album is going back to a point we made earlier where All We Know Is Falling felt like it had identity, and it had like the songs, and it had, you know, the attitude and the genre and all these cool things. But then Riot felt like that times 2, you know? Mm-hmm. And I think that trend continues here where Brand New Eyes just feels like Riot times 2 again. It is everything you could want from Paramore, but absolutely at its pinnacle. Once again, sorry to go back to it, but perhaps this is perhaps this is the reason why I struggled with the self-titled, is because I just remember thinking to myself, man, the way we've been growing with, you know, Paramore's discography, who can imagine what an on-course album 4 would have sounded like, you know? Mm-hmm. But yeah, so I think for me personally, like, this album just has so much range, you know what I mean? But at the same time, I will say it's not like all over the shop. Like, all of these songs do feel like they're in the same lane and they're using the same gear. And that's something that I look for when it comes to albums, is like, I'm not looking for a greatest hits, you know? I'm looking for a collection of songs that feel like they're doing the same thing even stuff like using the same guitar tones and stuff, like this album feels like a real moment in time. And I just think, yeah, man. I mean, Misguided Ghosts obviously is a bit of a left turn. The only exception is kind of in there as well. But I'd go as far as to say this is one of the few perfect albums I've ever listened to, personally. I'm always looking for a hole. I'm always looking for a bad song. But I genuinely think every track on this album is a definite song that I would happily listen to in isolation. And yeah, man, opens with Careful, which is insane. Closes with All I Wanted, which, as TikTok has kind of proved, was and has always been an insane song. And if you guys are including Decode being on there as well, I mean, that's like the best 12 Paramore songs, in my opinion, in the whole discography. So, yeah.
Yeah, dude, I'm so glad you mentioned Decode, because that song is awesome. And it's in Twilight, so makes that movie better.
Oh, there you go.
That's what makes it awesome.
Yeah,
I'll let all of y'all go, and then I'll do my best to not make a fool of myself.
Two songs I just quickly want to shout out looking at it now. I think Turn It Off and Where the Lines Overlap are two of my favorites off this record.
Where the Lines Overlap is amazing.
Yeah.
Unbelievable.
Lucas, I couldn't agree more about what you just said. This is as close to perfect, I think, as a Paramore album gets. Everything just hits, it clicks. They're still more in their early sound, which I personally love. But when they decide to go slow, like a slower acoustic song, they just hit the nail on the head. It just felt like everything, like getting lightning in a bottle, in my opinion, where no matter what they put on this album, it just worked. It just turned into a hit, or it's just a great song. Like, it just felt like they couldn't miss on this album. The only song I will say is Misguided Ghosts. I put in my notes, it's a good addition to the album. If it wasn't here, that's fine. But I think that's like the only, as close to a gripe as I can get. But otherwise, I only have praise for this album. Ignorance is my favorite Paramore song, personally.
Yes.
That song is just perfect. It's so good. I know we haven't talked about it much, but Paramore, I guess Haley has this very unique way of delivering some lyrics. It's almost like sarcastic in a way.
Like attitude.
Yeah, like
it's
attitude.
very snarky.
Snarky, sarcastic attitude. And Ignorance just hits that so well. Like, it just crushes it. And I think it's the perfect example of like what makes Paramore so unique, is that song right there. And then you have like Brick by Boring Brick, which has one of my favorite hooks in their entire discography. It's so catchy, so emotional.
The lyrics on this whole album, I think is worth talking about. This is like, I think for me, like you said, there's a sass to her sometimes, but I think for me, this was kind of, while they were still being po-faced, so it's like the albums after this, I think she almost knows she's being kind of like sarcastic in future, but I think this album was the perfect spot of like, the lyrics were very, very mature, very introspective, and not being too on the nose, I'd say,
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I think her delivery and the emotion in some of these songs, away from the sarcasm and away from the attitude, is unbelievable. Lucas mentioned All I Wanted. Like, you can feel she's putting everything into that song. And it just makes it unique for Paramore, and really unique for the genre to be able to capture that much emotion throughout an album and the change thereof. I'm glad we're on the same wavelength with Misguided Ghosts. I think my favorite song of the album is Playing God, even though the lyrics are the only one that's a little cheesy and maybe a little
agreed.
Yeah, but it's so fun though.
But man, that hook, it's so punchy. The hook is unbelievable. The chorus is so catchy. It's so much fun. But I mean, Ignorance through really Misguided Ghosts, or really Where the Lines Overlap, all great songs. And I agree with you guys. It feels like perfection.
Okay. I'm gonna get absolutely flamed on social media for this, so I might as well just lean in. But before I go villain mode, I do have some praise for this album I'd like to shine a light on. To me, this kind of feels like a brighter, more optimistic version of the albums that came before it. Like, obviously it shares a lot of the similar instrumental elements, but it generally seems a little brighter, maybe a little more hopeful at times. And I think that especially comes through in the slower tracks on here. And like, yeah, there may be that tinge of sadness to them, but instrumentally, a lot of the times they sound very sweet. Like the guitar tones are very sparkly and very bright. There's a lot of like chimes and other bright instrumentation, which really kind of puts together this really unique sound for the style of music that we typically talk about. And I mean, to that point, I think these are some of my favorite slower Paramore songs. Like, I love The Only Exception. It is just so pleasant to listen to and kind of a prime example of that hopeful instrumentation, I guess. I do like Misguided Ghosts. I think it's the acoustic guitars really bring a lot to the table. I don't know. I think this whole album kind of has a more optimistic feeling than the last, which really I do like. And Jeff, I'm right there with you. Ignorance, easily my personal favorite on here. Easy top 3 Paramore song. It's just so fun. The riffs, the chord progressions, the backing vocals, that song is perfect. That's a 10 out of 10. And now to go to kind of get into some of my grievances with this album, I think what holds it back is it does pick a lane and stay in it for the most part. Some of the songs come and go without any moment that really captures me, which for my favorite Paramore albums isn't necessarily the case. But I think the middle of this album kind of lingers a little bit. And this is where I'm going to really get flamed. Turn It Off is fine. Like, it's obviously well written, just about every Paramore song is, but there's not really anything about that song that really grabs me or makes me want to go back to it. And this is not.
Completely disagree.
Oh, you disagree with that? Just wait, buddy.
Oh.
And I honestly feel the same way about Brick by Boring Brick.
Oof.
Oh, come
that
on.
song.
Get out, dude. What is wrong with you?
Look, man, I don't know. It's just there's something about it that doesn't quite click with me, especially with the
Disrespectful.
Oh, you just wait till I start talking about that McDonald's bridge with the ba-da-da-das in there. Like,
oh no.
There's
So Lucas, do you want to become a full-time host of the show? Or...
Oh no, we're not gonna have an opening soon.
Yeah, we'll have tryouts.
Oh no. I don't know. There's just something about that bridge in particular that kind of irks me.
There's something to be said about non-lyrical hooks. I've always felt like a whoa or a like a da-da-da-da-da-da. Like on paper, it is kind of goofy. So I do kind of give you a pass on that a little bit because it's like I've always had a bit of a gripe about like hooks that don't have words attached to them. You know?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And I mean, I am not anti-gibberish lyrics. Like I was a big C'est Comme Ça defender earlier, and that whole chorus is C'est Comme Ça, na 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 na. And I'm not against it. It's just there's something about this one that doesn't quite work for me. I don't know, guys. There's some great songs on here. There's no denying that. I don't want to be like, oh, it's in 4th place. It's bad, because it's not. It's in 4th place. I just prefer the 3 albums above it. There are some great songs on here. It's just overall, this album just doesn't quite hit the highs that some of the other ones do for me.
That did nothing to convince me.
I'm not trying to convince you. I just need to explain my piece.
I still just don't see why you could put This Is Why above this album. Like, nothing you just said really justified that decision.
I like the weirdness of This Is Why more than the kind of standard Paramore sound that's found on this album. And that's not to say it's a bad sound. I just really love how weird This Is Why is.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
I just think that this is the pinnacle of their sound. And to be like, I don't like it because it's too standard Paramore sound, it doesn't make much sense to me.
Yeah,
that's
almost like praise for the album. It's like it set the tone for their sound. Like,
yeah, it is quintessential Paramore.
I think for me, that peak Paramore sound of this era of Paramore was Riot. And this kind of feels like it's playing the hits of Riot with a slightly different twist maybe. But I've heard all the best that sound has to offer on that album. And this album, to me, as a follow-up, didn't necessarily click for me. Now, I may have to go back and give it another shot after this because clearly I'm missing something. But in preparing for this, there wasn't anything that made me think, oh, this is that sound better. It made me think, oh, this is that sound again.
Yeah, I understand that. Riot has some of Paramore's most pure moments. And I think, me personally, I'm just like, cool, if there's another album after that, which has just got more of that and more kind of consistency, I'd say, then like load it up, you know?
Yeah.
And I think, personally, I one thing I will say as well is like, to me, this is like the Paramore album because it's like, obviously Ignorance was the single, and The Only Exception is a huge song, and etc. But I really do feel like there's almost like less of a jump. If you were to look at the quality scale on like a map, all the songs are like a 1 mark away from each other, you know? Whereas I think every other Paramore song, there's a 6 every now and then, you know? And then there's a 9. Whereas with this, it's like 8s and 9s across the board, in my opinion. And I think,
Yeah, I agree.
yeah, and I think maybe, I don't know, maybe there's not a 10. Maybe Misery Business is a 10, for example. And maybe Ignorance, I know you guys love that, so maybe it's a bad example. But, you know, I think personally, it's just like this song is just so consistent. This album, sorry, is so consistent. And I think that's what I look for in an album. You know, I would rather 12 8 out of 10s than 3 9s and a couple of 5s. And, you know, on top of that as well, this is back to the length of the album as well. This isn't bloated, you know, it's like 12 tracks is 45 minutes is kind of the perfect length for an album, and I don't think they overstay their welcome. The only thing, actually, I remember when I was a kid, the only thing that I struggled with this album was Feeling Sorry and Looking Up. I felt like the titles were too similar, and it sounds stupid, but I almost kind of like lumped them in together and like overlooked those songs a little bit.
Just you're talking about the evolution between Riot and Brand New Eyes, and yeah, if I like everything about Riot, and then they put out an album that shows more emotional evolution and better production, that is something that I'm looking
what I
for.
wanted.
Like, now we have the edge of the first 2 records, the emotion of what's this era, I guess. This is really their most and only real raw, in some songs, album. And the production value of, in my opinion, the best produced album. And yeah, I really, if you liked Riot, I don't understand how this falls below This Is Why. But you've already explained that, Nathan. I just,
with the feeling like Brand New Eyes is Riot again instead of Riot Plus, I think that kind of explains why I felt so refreshed by their self-titled album, because it is kind of, okay, we're going in a completely different direction now, and I was like, oh, cool, and I feel excited again.
Yeah, that does make sense.
Yeah, and I will say, you know, I don't know that there's anything on this album I dislike. At its worst, it's just kind of fine and songs happen. But there's nothing where I'm like, that was a bad song. That was unpleasant. To go to those songs that you just mentioned, like Feeling Sorry, I love kind of the muted rhythms in the verses. And it's like kind of an interesting take that I haven't quite heard from them before. Looking Up sounds so early 2000s pop punk in the best way. And so it's like there are all these elements that I really like. But as a whole, I feel like some of this album comes and goes.
That's fair.
Thank you.
I don't agree. I want the last thing said about this album to be good. This album rules. Now we can end the episode.
Yeah, and now we're done. All right. Well, before we get out of here, Lucas, could you just give us a run through of your list?
Cool. Yeah. So my least favorite Paramore album is the self-titled. My 5th favorite is All We Know Is Falling. Then This Is Why. Then Riot. 2nd place is After Laughter. And then finally, the GOAT, Brand New Eyes.
Very good. Lucas, thank you so much for being here. This was an absolute blast.
That was so much
Pleasure,
fun.
man. Thanks for chatting.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad we were able to make this work.
And I can come back again someday. You know, we'll find another band.
Yeah. Oh, we'd love to have you back. And maybe next time I won't make an absolute buffoon of myself.
Nah, you're good.
Oh my gosh. All right. Thank you to everyone so much for listening. If you've made it this far, we appreciate you. The show wouldn't exist without you. Come back for the next episode. We don't have a band set in stone yet, but it will be a return to our roots with just the 3 of us. So thank you so much for listening, and we'll catch you on the next one.